Hello. Well, we are back again to continue our conversation about sexuality and mothering. I'm Janelle Gullen from the Wild Orange Tree in Melbourne, Australia, and I am joined with the wonderful Lindsay Vestal from the Functional Pelvis. If you'd like to continue introducing yourself, Lindsay.
Absolutely. So I specialize in pelvic floor therapy, specifically working with pre and postnatal women. I work out of New York City and Paris, and I also have the great honor of offering an online course for other occupational therapists who are interested in pursuing pelvic health. And Janelle and I have had a two-part discussion. This is the beginning of the second part on this important topic of mothering and sexuality. So if you haven't heard our first conversation, please go back and listen. It certainly isn't meant to be sequential in any way, but we don't want you to miss out on anything we've talked about.
Good advice, Lindsay. Well, in part two of this conversation, what we really wanted to do was recognise that this whole mothering transition, this rite of passage, is something so much bigger than what we so often give it credit for. It's a huge transition moving into becoming a mother. It changes us in ways that we really couldn't imagine until we've actually experienced it for ourselves. And we really come out the other side being a different person. Yes, we are still ourselves, but there's been a significant shift. And part of this process is really rediscovering who we are as a woman and as a mother as well. And part of this can be really rediscovering our sexual self as well, because things may well have changed a lot in that regard.
I agree. I think one of the common myths that I see, or things that I would like to reinvent the conversation a little bit around, is this idea that, along with bouncing back to our prenatal self, is this idea that we could return back to that same sense of self. And I think that's really doing a great disservice to the transition of becoming a mother, because I think it's quite beautiful that we become a new evolution of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, before I had my children, I think about the person that I was. And while I certainly recognize and honor where I was in that time, I really enjoy being a mother. And I didn't always feel this way, but I think the more I spent time with the rehabilitation process of both mind and body and spirit, I really realized that the wisdom and the changes that accompany being a mom are certainly what I want to embrace. And I love that. I love that. And I think that when we think about becoming both physically and emotionally back to what we were, it really sort of discredits this evolution that happens, and that these rite of passages aren't recognized as such. And so I love that you brought this up, because if we can rediscover ourselves, not only who we are as a mother, but who we are as a sexual being while being a mother, what an important chapter of our life.
Hugely so. And I think the science is now starting to support what we often experience as mothers. We talk about baby brain and all these changes that happen in our body, but we're actually seeing that this is an upgrade to our nervous system, to our emotional well-being. Like, these are really positive changes that happen in our bodies. It isn't this negative thing that baby brain and so forth is addressed as. But I think when we go through this significant rite of passage, if we look at traditionally what was involved, there's three really important stages in rite of passage, whether this was stories about boys going out and finding lions and then coming back to the tribe, or whether it was mums giving birth to their babies. The first stage of a rite of passage is always a separation. And during pregnancy, we often feel that. We often become a little bit more inwards. Maybe we start nesting around our home. Often we'll turn off social media. We don't want to have conversations with people anymore. There's that separation. And the next part of rite of passage is the challenge. So that is the birth experience itself. And I'm not sure where the quote comes from, but sometimes it's said that mothers go to the stars to collect the souls of their babies and bring them back to earth. And whether you think that actually physically happens or if it's just an analogy, there's this real sense of challenge when we're opening up to that birth energy, however that birth plays out on the day. But the final, and I think sometimes most important part of rite of passage is that reintegration and support to come back to your tribe or your community, and a real honouring of that experience, that rite of passage that you've been through, recognition that you've come back a different person, someone that's actually got something really special to offer to that community around you. And in most cultures nowadays, women are going through that separation and that challenge of birth, but then we leave them hanging. We don't have that support to reintegrate them back into the tribe or their local community, where we're on our own, mothering in isolation. That significant upgrade that's happened, that transition, isn't acknowledged. And then we wonder why we've got nervous systems that can't regulate so well, and that we're feeling infinity, and we don't have a libido. And I think so much of this is really connected to the way that we recognize mothering as not just an event that happens, but an actual rite of passage, and the way that we don't support women through those really crucial stages of rite of passage, so that we can come back to ourselves in a place that feels honored and safe, and be able to explore that sexual part of ourselves and how that might have changed through that mothering transition.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's gonna. I need a moment to digest that. That was really, really wonderful information to share. Our last talk, we mentioned a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy in terms of, getting our base needs met before things as luxurious and as pleasurable as intimacy can feel safe again in our bodies. And if we haven't had a chance to reintegrate that experience, that rite of the second aspect of the rite of passage, that challenge, it makes so much sense, doesn't it? That libido is we may have challenges bringing it back online, because so much more of the experience we haven't taken the time to process and to feel safe again in our own bodies. And if that doesn't happen, that next step that really sort of elevates ourselves and our humanity can be a real stumbling block.
Yeah, hugely so. And I think it's quite ironic that those things that we know postpartum women need, like we need rest, we need good nutrition, we need touch, we need companionship, wise women around us, so often those things are considered luxurious, but then they're actually the real basic things that we know women need as they come through that transition. And I still don't know who to credit it to, but there was a meme going around Facebook saying that there's no point being horny if you're getting chased by a lion in the Serengeti. And you kind of have a bit of a laugh about it, but it's so, so true. When we've got mothers who haven't been able to integrate that birth experience, that rite of passage experience, their nervous system is in that flight and fight mode. And yeah, there's absolutely no point bringing out the sexuality card in that regard. Our bodies physically can't do it. We're not primed for that. We need to be able to come back to that rest and digest, that safe state in our body. So I think I'd love to talk a little bit more about nervous system and how that plays out and how that impacts a whole range of things, even pelvic health and nutrition and so forth, which we spoke about in part one of this conversation. But I think returning to feeling safe in our bodies is a real massive thing, especially when there is so much birth trauma being reported by women as they come through that transition.
Janelle, do you have any suggestions for any of our listeners how they can reintegrate and regulate their nervous system after they've had a baby?
Yeah, I think it depends at what point you are in your journey. I think it's ideal if women can become aware of this before they birth their baby. That first 6 weeks after birth, physically and energetically, our bodies are so open, like we feel it, like we kind of feel like our insides are all a bit floppy and our bellies floppy, and emotionally we're so sensitive to what is going on around us. So if we're able to put things into place to make sure that we are getting rest and that we are protected from real frantic, anxious sort of energy in that time, it can make a huge difference to our ability to be able to I guess, close down that birth energy and reintegrate back into our bodies. I think there's a reason why traditional cultures called that first 40 days a real sacred window. Our newborn babies are so vulnerable and sensitive, but we're exactly the same as a newborn mother. And if we have the opportunity to really protect that time, I think energetically in regard to our nervous system, that's a real massive window to be able to put that buffer around and allow ourselves to return to neutral in that regard. But if you've already passed that 6 weeks and you're realizing that your nervous system is just completely on fight and flight, I think there's a whole lot of different modalities for doing that. Like, some of it can be just reconnecting to your body. So some of the work that I do around reconnecting to your womb, the holistic pelvic care, just reconnecting to that pelvic space, just noticing what's going on there. Like somatic experiencing can be a really useful process, incorporating some of that body and mind aspect of that as well. For some people, more psychological focused strategies can be really useful to really look at bringing down that nervous system to a place where it feels safe in our bodies again. And I think it's so individual for what works for each person. I think it would be ideal if we could try to put a bit more of a little protective bubble around women early on, but the reality is that we don't always experience it in that way. Excuse me.
Of course. And while you grab your glass of water, which I was just there a moment ago myself, I want to say that for a lot of people, those 40 days could feel quite luxurious. They might feel like, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources, I don't have the finances. And quite frankly, I want to hurry up and get back to my former self, physically, emotionally. That's the person I was, and I feel the most relatable to that person. And I think that one of the things that I often share with my clients are that 40 days may seem like a long period of time, but if you take the time to really nourish and replenish and restore in your version of 40 days, it could be 32 days, it could be 15 days, but that special window where you can take some time to really nurture yourself and baby, it's a small price to pay for hopefully a much bigger window, period, chapter, longevity of life to feel safe and established. And what a wonderful gift for our babies to be able to be a mom that is secure and feels like fight or flight is not at the go at any moment, sort of that feeling of, we might hear, a distant sound in the other part of the house, or what we think might be our baby crying. And sometimes we can already feel that emotional energy really picking up. And to me, those were some signs and symbols, that my nervous system hadn't quite come back online, and I needed to spend some time nourishing that. So whatever our signs and symptoms can be, always looking and noticing, okay, I have a little bit more work to do here. I'm going to communicate that, with my family supports that I just need a little bit more time, or whatever the case may be. I just want to reiterate that it's a small window that can really pave the way for the future.
Yeah. And I think when we look at like the rates of mental health challenge in postpartum, when we look at things like adrenal and thyroid issues, autoimmune conditions that women are experiencing, the way that we're seeing physical things like prolapse and incontinence and things like this playing out, we're not doing something right to support women's bodies to recover. And I think really being able to honour in your own way, and I think it's really challenging. This is an individual conversation as well as a collective conversation. Like, there's some women that don't have the resources and don't have the family or that community support around them. So we need to be doing what we can individually, but also changing the expectation as a collective around what women really should just have, not as a luxury, but as a basic necessity in that postpartum time. Because I think when we honour and really nourish women in that time, we are going to see different health outcomes for women in the longer term. Like traditionally, they said 40 days for 40 years, and I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Well said. Well said. Yeah.
but it can feel like a very long time when you're in it. And again, I talk about the fact that our monthly menstrual cycles should actually be preparation for that idea that in our bleeding time our bodies are usually calling us to more rest and nourishment of self, even if it's just acknowledging that different energy that we've got for that day or two in our cycle when we usually don't have as much outward energy. But so many of us push through, and often we can when we're younger. We don't learn how to stop and be with ourselves and rest and see what our body needs. So when we sit with that longer cycle of pregnancy and postpartum, we don't know how to stop and rest and nourish ourselves in that shorter monthly cycle. So that 40 days or that longer postpartum period just feels like an absolute eternity, because we haven't had that practice that our monthly menstrual cycles should be initiating us into. So maybe a little off track, but that's how I view that part of the 40 days.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, no. I hope that for anyone listening to this conversation who, potentially is in their prenatal period of time, potentially can start to consider that monthly flow as an opportunity to do just that. Not only an opportunity to practice for the event of those 40 days after becoming a mother, but as an event to even honor themselves in that month of time, during that month rotation. Because so much of our life, I'm not in New York City right now, I'm in Paris, but when I'm in New York City, man, do I feel that drive and that ambition and that energy to keep going and going. And it can become addictive to not recognize that there is built in our own lives, and how lucky we are, by the way, as women, to have this monthly reminder. And if we can recognize it, even if it's for an hour, there's some days when I just want to pull the sheets over my head, and for the months that I'm able to indulge in that, man, what a difference I feel for the duration of throughout the next month. And so I really love that idea, Janelle, of using that as practice and preparation for that recovery period.
Yeah, no, definitely. Something else that I wanted to talk about was the actual energetic impact of birth. So I guess this is related to nervous system in some ways, but when women have given birth, perhaps by C-section, if that was something that they weren't expecting, I'm interested. Have you come across women that find that energetically it doesn't feel right for intimacy, especially if we're talking about penis in vagina kind of penetration? They sense that this baby hasn't come out where it should, and that's certainly not judging that mode of delivery. Just energetically, they might feel in their body that it's not quite right for something to be coming back in yet. I don't know. Have you encountered that? I know certainly some of the energetic work that I do with women in their bodies, they notice that, and it's something that we can work with and just restore that pattern of energy and which way things are flowing in that pelvic space.
Absolutely. So I see two things most common, and I want to also say this a little bit depends upon how the delivery went. So did they have a chance to labor? Was there some laboring involved where they thought the baby was going to be a vaginal delivery and then it switched to an emergency C-section, versus there being a planned C-section in place, even though the plan wasn't what they had thought for, like, let's say 9 months, right? Towards the end, the practitioner said, okay, let's plan a C-section for you, maybe breech, whatever the case may be. So those are two different scenarios. And I would say most commonly for the woman who ends up trying to labor and then being rushed to the emergency room, of course, there's a lot of nervous system hype that happens because of this unplanned event. And regardless of having this safe, wonderful baby in our arms, there's a bit of reconciliation that emotionally and mentally and psychologically happens. And I think we feel that energetically in our pelvis quite often. And so the two scenarios that I see are the one you described, Janelle, which is this sense of, I wasn't, nothing came out, my baby didn't come out this
Well, we've just lost you there, Lindsay.
Not ready for something to come back in. Is this any better?
Yes, I think you're back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So the sense of not welcoming their scenario that I saw, because maybe the baby didn't pass through the vaginal area, that they feel quite open and like they're still birthing. So this sense of the baby hasn't come through. I'm waiting. I'm ready. I'm expecting for this to happen. And so again, we're not really ready to welcome back in. So I think that the summary ends up being the same, that we're not sort of ready for an entry back into that space.
Yeah. And I know with Lynn Schulte's birth healing training, which I've recently completed, she often talks about this open birthing pelvis. So that's kind of separate to how the baby actually emerged. But if that whole pelvis is still quite open after that birth experiencing, she talks about what impact that has on the pelvic floor and all those other structures in the body. But I just wonder what impact that has, being so energetically open, walking around, like maybe even for years after the birth, and how that actually impacts on our sense of self and sexuality as well. It's really interesting to consider.
Oh, 100%, 100%.
But I think the other thing that we see, and I guess it's harking back to some of those thoughts around the lack of support that women often get in this postpartum period, things like that lack of support, fear, anger, all those sorts of emotions, they tend to sit so heavily in that pelvic space. Often it can create a lot of tension in various parts of the pelvic space. It can be really interesting to do vaginal mapping to see exactly how those things are playing out. But doing work around pelvic floor therapy, there's so much about having tightness and tension in that vaginal space that is definitely not conducive to sexuality and intimacy. Maybe you'd like to speak a little bit about that.
I would love to. Yeah. So I think that when a woman is having some trouble coming back to her sense of self after she's had a baby, and that could be leaking urine, that could be incomplete emptying after they go to the bathroom, this could be difficulty having sex, having it be painful. Again, I think that most of them are thinking right away what they need to do is Kegels, right? Like that's sort of what our society talks about the most in terms of, okay, if there's a problem down there, we need to do Kegels. And I would just like to say that's a huge myth. And a lot of us actually are holding a lot of tension after we have a baby. And if someone were to call me and say any one of those symptoms I just mentioned they were experiencing, I'm leaking urine, I'm feeling like not all of my urine is coming out, I'm having painful intimacy, I can't tell based on their symptoms if their pelvic floor is in that sense of held and tightening and tension, or if it's quite the opposite, which is what they're assuming needs to happen, that they're quite open and that they're sort of relaxed down there. And I totally understand that someone would think I need to tighten up if I'm leaking urine, or if I'm not having sensation, or if I'm having too much sensation with intimacy. But in actuality, and again, this is very individual. So for anyone listening, again, this is I'm explaining what I experience most of the time with my clients, but again, it's so individual. There's a lot of tension in most of my clients. And if they were to then add a Kegel as a repair mechanism, or as a way to fix one of their problems, it would be a little bit like me holding my arm up in a bicep curl position and just doing this with a 10 or 20 pound weight. Do you think I'm going to see any change in my bicep, in my tone, in my ability to functionally lift something greater or bigger if I just do this a bunch? Right? I'm not, because my muscle is not experiencing full range of motion. It's not able to go through the full breadth and width and experience coordination. And so this is akin to me just doing Kegels when my pelvic floor is already quite tense and held. And in fact, we can see even more problems happen in that case, because now blood is not as available, right? There's more tone and tension there when really we need to work progressively to be able to relax, which is such an important part of the pelvic floor capacity to then be able to strengthen, right? There's just such a beauty in that. And I think that this Kegel concept of being the fix for any problem that we have, is really quite untrue. And so I really urge people to find out either through their own vaginal mapping experience or working with a pelvic health practitioner to sort of find out the state of their own pelvic floor, because the last thing that we're ever going to gain strength from is adding tension to tension.
Yeah, hugely so. And if we're having this conversation about sexuality, like tension doesn't allow blood flow there. And blood flow is so crucial to female arousal. So it's certainly not going to be helping that. And I think, again, Kegels, it's often like I need to get everything tight again for intimacy following birthing this baby, especially if it's been a vaginal delivery. But yeah, it just doesn't quite work the way that we might naturally assume that it does. It can be quite counterintuitive.
No. And I want to mention that an orgasm is a result of range of motion in our pelvic floor. Orgasm, the robust sensation of an orgasm, is due to the muscle being able to move through its full breadth and width. And if we're restricted and tight, not only are we not getting that blood flow, but sensation is absolutely diminished because it's not able to move fully. And so again, if we're hoping to have more sensation, to give our partner more sensation, that tightening aspect could actually really be working against us for that ultimate goal.
Hugely so. And I think the breath is another part that comes into this as well. Like the breath and the diaphragm is so interconnected to our core and what's happening with our pelvic floor. And sometimes if we haven't really reintegrated use of those core muscles, we might see that diaphragm breathing, the core muscle, but that's actually stopping circulation of the blood flow, which is carrying the hormones. That's going to have negative impact on our pelvic floor as well, because that core isn't working nicely with all those different parts. I think the breath is something really important to talk about as well.
Well, and the nervous system stuff we just talked about, right? If we're not able to fully breathe, it's in fact going to put us in a state of anxiousness, right? And it's going to, our nervous system is not going to feel at that safe spot that can really be so conducive to feeling good in our bodies and to regaining strength and to having sensation again. So I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, I start with the breath with all of our clients. You know, the diaphragm and the ability to breathe like that is absolutely part of that inner core with the pelvic floor. You know, they're connected. They're like parentheses of one another. They need to move together. And so we often start at the top of that system so that we can start feeling safe and connected and integrated again. And then we work on getting those two areas working together as the system that they are.
Yeah, definitely. And through pregnancy, there can be some significant changes there, like the stomach and the liver can get a bit jammed up into the rib cage, needing to make more room for baby. Like looking at how the intestines have settled back down again, like maybe there's a little bit of tilt in the ribs and rib thrusting coming up, all of those things that can be quite natural adaptations in our body to pregnancy. They can actually really impact the breath and all those other things that we've spoken about too.
And what's amazing about those changes that you brought up, Janelle, is over the course of those full 9 months of pregnancy, you know, it's a long period of time, and the changes are happening so gradually that we don't often feel the difference. So if we look at our body's positioning and alignment, let's say month 1 of pregnancy, and we compare it to month 9, wow, it's tremendous, right? And we don't necessarily feel all the nuances of those changes. The big sweeping ones we do, but the smaller ones are quite subtle. And so then when we have our baby and we're focused on all these other things, our new normal of maybe the ribs being thrusted, such as the example you gave, we may not even know, we may not even quite feel. And so I think it's really important to spend some time with some of the somatic practitioners you talked about to bring our body back to that sense of self physically, so that can also help our emotional and mental health well-being to feel centered again as well.
Yeah, no, hugely so. And it's so important to be thinking about the breath. Now, I want to shift the conversation just a little bit and think about the impact on our changing roles and relationships that can come along when we become a mum, and how that might actually be playing into some of the challenges that arise around sexuality. And I think one of the big ones is sexuality can kind of change from being something that you enjoy doing with your partner and something that might just flow quite naturally out of your everyday life to feeling like another task that is on your huge list of, we've already mentioned the laundry and feeding the baby and trying to put some food in your mouth and things like that. And at the end of the day, it's like sex. So I think this is something that we need to have more conversations around how we navigate that. I think there's certainly a lot of, like, those whispered conversations about you'll never have sex again, or those sorts of things. But it can feel like a real task and something that we just have to do. So not something that we're real present in our bodies or something that we're seeking out for ourselves. It's just another job that we add to the list.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So what are some ways we can change that? You know, like how can it evolve from being a task to potentially being something that we're really looking forward to again?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that comes into play here is mums often talk about that feeling of being touched out and just not wanting to be touched by someone else, by their partner at the end of the day. And I think if we need to start thinking about, well, why isn't this intimacy actually something that is filling our cup, and something that isn't like coming out of our tank, but actually something that can be filling us up? So some of that is thinking about the type of sex and intimacy that we're actually engaging with. If we go back to the reflection that we have changed so much through that transition of becoming a mum, it might be, and Kimberly Ann Johnson talks a lot about this, maybe we just don't like the sex that we were having and the sex that is being offered, as our partner might assume that it's back to what we always did. And I think that's something really interesting to explore, how our own sexual preferences and the way we express our sexuality may actually change through that transition process.
Yeah, so we touched a little bit on that, both this talk and our last part, our part one, which is that this idea of role transition and becoming our new sense of self through this amazing rite of passage. And I think you're absolutely right. Sexuality can come part of that. It's like if our role and identity is changing, potentially our sexual preferences are changing too. So I think it's important to remember in our own bodies that can happen, and that's okay. And then being able to communicate that with our partner so we can try things a little bit differently, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And some of that comes back to our own self-awareness of what actually brings us pleasure. And in the part one of this conversation, we were talking about this general lack of awareness that we often have around our own anatomy and our own pleasure and what might be enjoyable for us. I think in mothering, it's a whole lot harder for us to just ignore that and go along with what's being offered. It really is a call to explore, well, what does feel pleasurable for me, and what does my body like, and how would I like to use this in conjunction with a partner?
Yeah, fantastic. I love that.
Yeah. I think in regard to roles and relationships, there can also be a lot of sense of expectation around return to intimacy. We have that 6-week check with our midwife or our obstetrician, and you kind of get the all clear for everything, which is such a farce and a fallacy. But often it's felt, well, at 6 weeks, I should be willing and able to return to intimacy, and often that would be penetration with a partner. And in our bodies, we may just feel that that's not actually enough time. I know there's a brochure that's put out by the Continence Association in Australia, and when they're talking about returning to intimacy, one of the considerations is how your partner feels. And yes, of course, we need to have that conversation, but I think so often it's put across as, well, if your partner's wanting this, well, maybe you should have wine and lube, as we've also spoken about as well. So I think some of these expectations that we put on ourselves, but also more broadly, these expectations of what we think return to intimacy might look like as mothering, and there could be a whole different range of timetables there that are right for us. And also thinking about what intimacy is. There is massive conversation around sex being penis in vagina, and there's a whole lot of other ways that we can express intimacy, and it might be that we're wanting to explore some of those different ways of connecting with our partner, and that can be a massive shift in what our sex life has been previously, if it was very focused on penetration, to be open to exploring different ways of connecting and being intimate and experiencing our sexuality with a partner.
Absolutely. And I think what can go along with that is this sense of not feeling like you're able to talk about and ask for something different, right? So many of us have fallen into our patterns and our habits with our partners. And I think it's just a refreshing opportunity, actually, to give it a little bit of an upgrade or a facelift, if you will, to say, all right, let's try a little bit differently. Like I'm really thinking, and I think for most couples, that's actually like refreshing. It's delightful. It's just giving ourselves that permission and recognizing that along with that rite of passage change, we can actually have roles and habits change in all facets of our life. And again, being able to communicate that and identify that in our own bodies and then speak with our partners about it is absolutely a great step in exploring that.
And that communication can feel really hard, especially if we haven't been familiar with having these sorts of conversations. Maybe we have been with our partner for a while and things haven't changed. Could be related to sexuality or a whole range of different roles in that relationship. Sometimes that communication and that conversation can feel really, really challenging. But again, there's lots of resources out there to support couples to do that. And I know Ali Taylor is, she's got a fantastic book around navigating that transition into mothering and the changes that brings around for a family and ways to support those conversations for what we're all needing in that space.
Do you happen to remember what the name of that book is, Janelle?
Ooh, I'm gonna have to look that one up. I can do that as we continue talking. But
Okay.
yeah, she's an Australian and she's got some wonderful hints and tips and think about navigating just that transition from being a couple to being a couple with children.
How wonderful. That is, it is so needed. And, you know, you had mentioned Ellie Taylor to me before when we were talking, and it's just not someone I'm familiar with. So I'd love to add it to my own bookcase. And for anyone listening, I'm sure they're super curious about it as well. I know that in the first chapter of us, we mentioned Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. And
well, we're just losing you there, Lindsay.
Okay. I was asking for the name of the Tammy Lynn Kent book that we had mentioned. So I think we're up to book recommendation 3.
Yep. We didn't hear any of those book recommendations.
Okay. I was reminding everybody of this is now our 3rd book recommendation. The first was Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. The second was Tammy Lynn Kent. Okay. Any better now?
Maybe.
How is this, Janelle? Okay.
Yep. No, I think give it a go.
I can edit this part out, so don't worry. Just let me know if you're. Okay. So just as a reminder, we've got 3 book recommendations so far in our 2 chats together. The first was Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. Our second was Tammy Lynn Kent's book, which is called The Feminine. Do you remember the name of that full title on that one?
Wild Feminine.
And then,
yep.
Perfect.
Ali Taylor.
And then we'll, yeah.
I've got it now. Ali Taylor, her book is Becoming Us, and she's also got a book, 8 Steps to Grow a Family That Thrives. So it's not all about sexuality, but certainly it's awesome support for things to think about and ways to actually have those conversations with a partner when you're needing things to change.
I love that. I love that. Fantastic. Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. So I'd love, if you don't mind, to transition a little bit now to talking about menstrual cycles.
Yeah, and we've been talking about them a little bit, haven't we, as I guess this roadmap for the way that we practice what's going to come along in postpartum and menopause. But I think menstrual cycles certainly have a contribution to sexuality when we're thinking about that as new mums, and some of that can be around fear of another pregnancy. Sexuality is probably how we ended up finding ourselves as a mother. So yeah, especially if we're not really understanding our own cycles and how that works, I think we spend so much time trying not to get pregnant that we don't always understand those intricacies in our cycle. The fact that we do only have a few days each month when we are fertile and able to fall pregnant. But I think there can be a lot of anxiety around our menstrual cycles and are we going to fall pregnant when we're not actually wanting to?
Any recommendations for anyone listening as a way to understand a little bit more about those natural rhythms?
Yeah, I think there's so many resources out there. Like Nicole Jardim is someone who I certainly reference. She's got some real down-to-earth, fact-based information. I also love the book by Lisa Hendrickson Jack, The Fifth Vital Sign. She talks
Mm.
so much about the different parts of your cycle and what's happening in each of those stages. So I think that's a wonderful reference book as well. We'll add that number 4 to the book list. To get really good information about menstrual cycles, because we don't know a lot about our anatomy, and we definitely don't know a lot about our menstrual cycles as a general statement either. So yeah, I think that fits into that some of that education that we get. Maybe it's that incorrect sex ed that we get taught, that we don't get all of those details. But yet our menstrual cycle is also closely tied to our libido. There's certain times of the month when we may be feeling more likely to be intimate versus other times when we're not as well. So I think understanding our cycles and then making some informed decisions about what we would like to do regarding birth control is a really important part of exploring sexuality as a mother.
Absolutely. And I think, once I, in my own life, started understanding my cycles a little bit better, it became this real empowering sense for me because so for instance, I am a mother who has prolapse, which is just when the organs in the body are sitting in a different anatomical position in our pelvis. And so when that happens at certain times, I can feel a little bit of heaviness or a little bit of pelvic pressure. And once I understood a little bit more about my cycle, so at certain times of the month, our cervix is a little bit higher. And at certain times, our cervix, which is, the top part of our vaginal canal, is sitting a little bit lower. And during the time of menstruation, right, it's sitting a little bit lower. And I was wondering, like, why all of a sudden, certain times of the month, I was feeling more pressure and feeling more heaviness. I thought, what did I do wrong? Was it that exercise I fit in? Was I not breathing well? Was it the time I had to hold my baby for 2 hours and I wasn't expecting to? I didn't have my baby carrier with me. And you start to feel shame and blame around all those choices when anatomically, if you can just understand that there are some predictable changes that happen, wow, like what empowering feeling that can be, because you can now recognize, anticipate it, potentially change your workouts around that time of the month so that you're not exacerbating that feeling of heaviness. Maybe do some restorative yoga during that time, or take on a swim, or whatever might help you feel a little bit better. And then use more of the ovulation time of the month when your cervix is much higher to get your sweat on. And anyway, that predictability and understanding your body can be so illuminating for many, both myself and my clients.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when we have that confidence in our body and understanding of what our body does, like that's a real crucial part before we're willing to engage in intimacy with someone as well. If we understand why things might feel a little heavier or things might not feel quite as they did because we know where we're in our cycle, I think that gives us more confidence, to engage in intimacy with a partner too.
100%. The more we can understand about our body, the more we can understand ourselves and our place in this world and our relationships, whether that's with our children, our spouse, our work colleagues. I mean, it just all comes back to that sense of centeredness and nervous system safety that, once we spend a little bit of time nourishing, the payback is quite tremendous, isn't it?
Yeah, hugely so. Now, there's just one tiny little thing that I want to tack on the end there related to our menstrual cycles. I briefly mentioned birth control, but I think that's something else for women to be aware, that birth control can actually have a negative impact on our libido as well. And that may not be a side effect that women are expecting when they go on birth control after having a baby. And sometimes that can make the waters even a little bit muddier when you're trying to negotiate a return to intimacy and refinding your own pleasure in that mothering space. So just something to point out how, birth control can, especially hormonal birth control, can impact libido as well as our emotional well-being, and that can certainly play into sexuality.
That's a great reminder, because I'm not so sure that many of us are hearing that message when we are at our doctor's office and potentially getting that prescription and filling it at the pharmacy. That bit of knowledge may not come along with that prescription. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, no problem. Well, wow, we have covered a lot of topics, so many different things that I don't think women typically realize might be related to sexuality and their experience of that in mothering. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me, Lindsay. It's been an absolute pleasure to to draw on your wisdom and the sorts of things that I'm doing with my clients as well. And we really hope that you, the listeners, have enjoyed this conversation just as much as we have had having it.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The pleasure has certainly been mine. And for anybody that is interested in talking, that's exactly right. For anyone listening who have questions for Janelle and myself, I know we're both certainly open. This is such a passion project of ours. We feel it's incredibly empowering to be able to spread this information. So absolutely, please reach out to us if you have any questions.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll make sure our contact details are available. But if you'd like to get in contact with me, I'm at the Wild Orange Tree, which is www.thewild-orangetree.com.au. And just a reminder, I'm located in Melbourne, Australia, but I do online work as well. And Lindsay, where can we find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at www.functionalpelvis.com, also on Instagram and Facebook. And I do have a weekly newsletter called The Hump Day Hustle, which is free, and it just provides all sort of insider tips, things that inspire me to better connect to my own body that I share with you guys. So you can subscribe to that list on my website.
Fantastic. Thank you for that reminder. Your social media is definitely a good place to contact me as well. I'm at the Wild Orange Tree on Facebook and Instagram as well. And I also have a monthly video blog that I put out, which you can sign up for to get that straight to your inbox. So we would love to hear from you and any feedback and your thoughts on this really important topic, mother and sexuality.
Fabulous, Janelle. I look forward to future conversations with you.
Same. Thanks again.
Thank you.